Hey everybody, it's Monica, mental health therapist. In today's video, we're going to be talking about social work as a career, 7 things that you should expect. If you're interested in this video, then please keep watching.
I'm Monica Thomas, the founder and clinical social worker at Kindred Connections Therapy Center. I've been a social worker for over 12 years. I decided to do an entire YouTube channel on my journey from cubicle working social worker to successful entrepreneur. Welcome to my channel.
So many of you probably clicked on this video because you're either enrolled in a social work program or you're just starting out in your social work career. So what we're going to talk about today are 7 things that you can expect when you're starting into social work. Now, the reason why you became a social worker are varied. I became a social worker because I wanted to make a difference in the lives of people. But one of the things that you'll find is that wanting to make a difference in social work is not just the bulk of the work. There are other things that you have to do within the profession that you're taught when you're in school, but they manifest themselves in totally different ways when you get out into the field. So you might find that you get discouraged when you're in the field, or you might second guess your decision as to why you became a social worker, because once you began doing the work, you find that it's not just about helping people. There are a lot of other things in the profession that you have to deal with. So we're going to talk about what some of those things are today. Number 1 is to expect to work long hours. I think regardless of whatever social work career that you go into as a social worker, because we're meeting the needs of people, we have to meet people where they are. And that's not in this clearly defined box of a 9-to-5 job. Sometimes we have to work very early in the morning, or sometimes we have to work around the clock shifts, or sometimes we have to work well into the evening. So I am a mental health therapist in private practice. So that means I could have formed my practice to be a regular 9-to-5 practice where people come in the morning and then I start my day at 5. But because I wanted to meet the needs of the community, I know that many of my clients can't meet during the day because they work. So I knew that I had to extend my hours to 7 p.m. So I see clients up until that time. So if you're working in children's services, if you're working in an after-school program, if you're working in a hospital, just know that some of those settings will require you to work long hours, and it won't be a traditional 9-to-5 job. Number 2 is to expect a lot of paperwork. Now, we all know this when we go to school. We take our class about how to do SAP notes and DAP notes and how to do documentation and the importance of documentation. But when you get into the field, every agency has their own requirement about what documentation is required, and every agency is not operating in this century. Some agencies are very antiquated in how they document, very antiquated in their policies and procedures, in the way in which they keep documentation, and all agencies are not online. So you'll find that in some agencies, you're still having to write out notes by hand, still having to copy off a lot of papers, still having to fill out a lot of forms that aren't online or are not electronic. So even though in your everyday life, you're finding ways that you're using the internet more and that you're using downloadable forms, but it can be discouraging and disappointing when you go into agencies and they've not caught up with the times. So you have to be aware of that, and you have to be aware that every agency may use their own software and their own systems, and sometimes those software and systems do not speak to one another. So you're finding that you're going into this software program to complete this form, then you're having to go into another program to complete another form, and then the documentation doesn't match up. So just know that there may be a lot of paperwork that you have to complete. You have to do a really good job of documenting. And then when you're taking notes around the progress that your clients are having, some agencies will be online, but some agencies are still paper and pencil. Number 3, expect to be a problem solver. If you're someone who gets easily overwhelmed by difficulty and challenges and problems, know that this may not be a good fit for you. You always have to be thinking one step ahead. You always have to be in solution mode. Not saying that you don't deal with the problems when they come. You absolutely do that in the moment, but when dealing with the problem, you have to be aware of it's going to be your responsibility to help clients come up with a solution to those problems. So that means you yourself have to know about community resources. You need to know where people can go to get access to the services that they need. You should probably be the one making collateral calls to organizations and agencies within your community to make sure the services are still available for people. I think one of the most frustrating things for clients is for us to refer them to an agency or an organization and the service is no longer available, or a service that used to be free now has a cost associated with it. So if we're making these calls ahead of time and letting our clients know what services are available in the community, we are putting ourselves out there as that number one resource that clients can rely on for information that's accurate and up to date. So another way in which you are going to be a problem solver is helping clients learn how to solve their problems themselves. So this doesn't mean that you lay out all of the solutions and all the ideas for your clients and then expect them to follow through with exactly what you want them to do. In some instances and in some agencies, if you work for Children's Services, for example, if a client is working a case plan, that's sometimes exactly what you have to do. But I find the best way to engage and work with clients is to engage them in the process, to ask them what is important to them, what outcomes would they like to see for their lives, what goals do they have, and what are some things that they're thinking that they would like to see happen as a result of your interaction together. So the more that you can create case plans and strategies with clients, sometimes the least amount of resistance that you get, because they see themselves as being part of the process. And it's not just this plan or this program that's imposed upon them, but it's something that they had an equal say in creating. So you have to think of ways that you can do that for your client. Think about ways that you can engage them in the process, and think about the questions that you would need to ask them in order to engage them in the process. So some questions that I like to ask clients are, what do you think about adding this part into your case plan? Or what are your thoughts and ideas if we chose to go this route? Or how do you think this would be beneficial for you if we decided to do this as opposed to this? Or what did you have in mind if the judge says that you need anger management? What types of things do you notice that you struggle with or that are triggers for you that you think would be most helpful and most beneficial? So you take yourself out of the role of always having to be the problem solver, and you put some of that responsibility on the client, and then you guys just work that process together. Number 4, one of the other things that you have to expect in this profession is stress. This profession comes with a high level of stress. And it's documented that social workers sometimes carry the stress of their clients. So if you're working with women in domestic violence situations, if you're working with children who are being removed from their families, if you're working with highly traumatized populations, then your work is going to come with a high level of stress. And it's good to know that going into it so that you can have ways to manage your stress. You can have ways to de-stress, and then you can also know what your triggers are that will create more stress for you. So if you are a domestic violence survivor yourself and you're working very closely with domestic violence survivors, you know that that interaction could potentially be a trigger for you because you're so close to that work. So it may be hard for you to disconnect from it. You may find yourself totally engaged in the work where it's hard for you to pull yourself away from it. And sometimes it's hard to see where you stop and the work begins. So if that is the environment in which you're working, you have to know that being that close to the work will create a lot of stress in your life. And I have created a free audio for social workers to help manage overwhelm and stress. So if you're interested in that audio, I'll put it in the description so you can check that out. And it comes with a free guide that walks you through 5 strategies to reduce overwhelm in your career and life. And if you find it helpful, please share it with someone else, and then reach out to me and let me know if you found the audio helpful. Number 5. One thing that you have to expect when you go into this field is dealing with red tape and politics. What that means is there's always a policy that impacts the work that we do. So before, when I gave you the example of the domestic violence client that you might be working with, there are government policies and there are state statutes and regulations that'll impact the work that you're doing with domestic violence survivors. So you have to understand that when you're dealing with social issues come with political influences, and those political influences can sometimes feel as if they weigh more heavier than the work that we're doing. So if there's a politician who has a certain agenda, or if there's something in your city that's going on that's highly driven by politics, you have to know that the well-being of clients and the well-being of vulnerable communities may not be at the top of the priority list. And you'll find that in your work, and it can be very frustrated. But just because you expect it doesn't mean that you have to accept it. And that's one of the tenets within our social work practice is advocacy. So whenever we see that those policies and politics are weighing more heavily and showing to be more important than the needs of our community, then that's when our advocacy comes into play, making sure that politicians and making sure our government leaders and our government officials keep those priorities first and keep those needs of vulnerable populations at the forefront of the decision making that's happening within our communities. And red tape is just all of those agency difficulties that makes it hard for you to provide services to your clients. That's something that you're going to have to expect. But again, just because you expect it doesn't mean that you accept it. You should always be questioning agency policy and whether or not it's relevant to the times, whether or not it's meeting the needs of the community at the state at which it stands. You should always be advocating for the things that you hear your clients say. And just because your agency has done things over and over again, year after year after year, and the status quo is maintained, doesn't mean that that status quo has to keep going in the way that it is if it's not meeting the needs of the community and if it's creating too many roadblocks and difficulties for clients to access services. So you knowing how to effectively advocate in the reduction of red tape and come with solution-oriented responses that can create a way for clients to get easier access to services and to eliminate barriers, that's going to be a key way for you to reduce your stress in this profession. Number 6. One thing to expect, unfortunately, is that feeling that you feel like you're not making a difference. I think all of us within the social work field have experienced that feeling where we went into the field and went into the profession for one thing, but the client demographic that we wanted to serve, the change that we wanted to see happen within clients or within our community, we just didn't see that impact, or the impact took a really long time to come into play. And even before, when I was talking about policy and politics and red tape can be those things that make it hard for you to see change in your clients, or make it hard for you to see that things are progressing on your caseload. So you have to know that when you're working in this field, that you will experience those feelings that you're not making a difference. And I also did a video before about 4 mistakes that social workers make when starting in the profession. And one of those mistakes was staying in a position for too long. So if you find that you stayed in a position for too long, then that can further this feeling that you're not making a difference. So you have to be mindful of where you are and the impact that you're having and whether or not the work is a good fit for where you feel that you are in your life. And then you have to define for yourself, what does making a difference mean to you? Making a difference means different things to different people. And we have to be realistic about what making a difference means. Making a difference can mean that a client changed their way of thinking about what it meant to parent, or a client learned a new way to interact with their child, or a woman who was in a domestic violence situation was more mindful of her worth and her value. It doesn't mean that she doesn't get into another domestic violence situation. It could just mean that she increased her awareness over what she wants and what she deserves in her life, and she's not progressed in the way that maybe makes you feel that she's ready to make change. But change for her may require a little bit more time and a little bit more learning. So sometimes we're never around to see the fruit of the seeds that we plant within our clients because we don't see those immediate changes within their lives. But just because we don't see it manifest in front of us doesn't mean that the client isn't going to make change. So having a realistic expectation about what change means to you is important, because in your mind, you may be thinking that you want clients to have leaps and bounds of change, but for some clients, change can be very small and incremental. So making sure that you're not putting your expectation of change onto the client is important. We have to meet people where they are. We have to know that people are coming from sometimes very traumatic situations, and they've learned these adaptive behaviors within their lives that can take a very long time to disconnect and detach from. And it's not our job to judge their journey. It's not our job to judge how far along they're coming on that journey, but it's making sure that we're giving them the skills, the knowledge, and the empowerment to know that they can move their lives along in the direction that they want it to go. Expect to have that one client that surprises you. that one who you never thought in a million years that they would turn it around and that they would get themselves together, or the client that just seemed like they really weren't listening to what you had to say, that what you said seemed like it went through one ear and out the other, that they really didn't resonate with what you were saying, that they really weren't listening to what you were saying. But then you see them years down the line and their lives are improving, things are going well, or you talk to them months down the line and they've implemented some things that you have said to them or that you suggested. So that's sometimes the reward of the work, that, like I said before, we're not always able to see when the fruits of our labor manifest for our clients, but know that those rewards do come, and those are sometimes the most fulfilling moments of being in the social work profession. So I hope these 7 things to expect were helpful for you. Please share this with another social worker who you think will benefit from this information. If you've not already, please subscribe to my channel. We'll be releasing more videos about social work careers and professions, as well as mental health and the entrepreneur side of clinical social work. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, be well.